I got a short text. Don't show up anymore. No phone call, no conversation, just exclusion. What they didn't imagine is that I would really disappear. And the consequences came fast. My name is Helen. I'm 62 years old, and I'm the mother of 3 children. Robert, 43 years old, Jennifer, 40, and Michael, 37. And before I start telling this story, I ask that you write in the comments what city you're listening from, leave your like, and subscribe to the channel. That way, you help me keep growing and bringing increasingly impactful stories. Continuing with the account, and for you to understand better, I'll tell you how it all started. You know that moment when you look at your phone and feel like something changed forever? That's exactly what happened to me that Tuesday afternoon. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when my phone vibrated on the table. It was a message from the family group, that same one where we always shared photos, jokes, weekend plans. I grabbed the device with that automatic smile of someone expecting something good, but what I read made me freeze. Don't show up anymore. 3 words, just that. No explanation, no context, no chance to understand what was happening. My heart raced. I stood there, rereading that sentence as if it would change meaning the 2nd, 3rd, 10th time. What do you mean, don't show up anymore? Who had written this? Why? I waited for someone to speak up, for someone to say it was a misunderstanding, that it had been a mistake. But the silence from the group was deafening. Nobody reacted, nobody defended, nobody questioned. It was as if everyone had agreed beforehand, as if that message was a sentence already decided behind the scenes. I, who had always been the present mother, the one who solved everyone's problems, was being discarded. And worse, without the right to defense. The feeling was like having the ground ripped out from under my feet. Have you ever felt this? That emptiness in your stomach? That dizziness that makes everything seem unreal? I started trembling. I sat in the kitchen chair because my legs wouldn't support me anymore. I looked around my house, full of photos of my children, grandchildren, the happy moments we built together. Everything seemed like a lie now. How do we get to this point? How does an elderly mother who dedicated her entire life to family receive a message like this? I couldn't process it. My phone was still in my hand, the screen still lit on that cursed group. I spent the next few hours glued to that device. I refreshed the group every 5 minutes, hoping someone would take it back, that someone would say something, anything, but nothing happened. The silence confirmed everything. I had been expelled. And look, that word seems exaggerated, but it's exactly what it was. Expulsion. As if I were an intruder in my own family. I tried calling each of my children. None answered. I sent private messages, trying to understand what had happened. They viewed them and didn't respond. You know what that is? It's total humiliation. It's feeling like you're not even worth an explanation. The night was the worst of my life. I stayed awake until 4 in the morning, trying to remember something I could have done wrong. Infinite replays of recent conversations ran through my head. Did I say something that offended someone? Did I demand too much? Did I, without meaning to, become a burden to them? These questions corroded me inside. Because when you're discarded like this, without clarity, without conversation, you start to believe that the problem is you, that you deserve this treatment. I fell asleep crying, hugging my pillow, feeling a pain I didn't even know existed. The next day, I woke up with swollen eyes and the foolish hope that everything had been a nightmare. I grabbed my phone running. The group was still there, silent. The message too. Nothing had changed. I got out of bed like a zombie and tried to follow my routine, but it was impossible. Every corner of the house reminded me of them. The mug my daughter gave me on Mother's Day. The picture frame with the photo of the whole family together last Christmas. The armchair where my grandson always sat to watch cartoons when he came to visit. Everything hurt me. It was like I was living in a house of ghosts, surrounded by memories of a life that no longer existed. I tried to rationalize. I thought, okay, let's take it easy. There must be a reasonable explanation for all this. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. I'd always been the mother who helped with everything. I paid the down payment on my oldest son's house when he got married. I supported my daughter's studies until she graduated. I gave the car to my youngest when he needed to start working. I solved financial emergencies, took care of the grandchildren when they needed it, was the foundation of everything. And now I was disposable. a piece that fulfilled its function and could be thrown away. This real story taught me something cruel. The love you give doesn't always come back to you. The following days were silent torture. I avoided leaving the house because I didn't want to run into anyone I knew. People would ask about the children, about the grandchildren, and I'd have to lie. I'd have to smile and say everything was fine, that everyone was great. But inside, I was shattered. I looked at photos on social media and saw my children posting normal things, as if nothing had happened, as if I had never existed. You know that feeling of being erased from your own story? That was exactly it. I had become invisible, a ghost walking through my own life. What hurt most wasn't even the rejection itself. It was the coldness, the ease with which they discarded me. There was no difficult conversation, no fight, no nothing. They simply decided I was no longer part of that story. And look, I know there are many elderly mothers out there going through similar situations. Ungrateful children who only show up when they need something. But when it happens to you, when it's your own family treating you like this, the pain is indescribable. It's a kind of loneliness you can't explain to anyone. Because how do you tell others that your own children don't want you around anymore? I stayed in this limbo for days, without answers, without explanations, just with that short and brutal message echoing in my head. Don't show up anymore. 3 words that destroyed decades of dedication. 3 words that transformed a loving mother into a stranger. I didn't know yet, but that message was going to change everything, not the way they imagined. Because if there's one thing I learned in this emotional story, it's that when you're pushed to the bottom of the pit, either you give up for good, or you discover a strength you didn't even know you had. And I was about to discover mine. The truth is that at that moment, sitting in my empty living room, I still had no idea how much that exclusion was going to transform me. I was still trapped in the pain, in the humiliation, in the incomprehension of everything. But something inside me, deep down there, started to move. It wasn't anger yet. It was something different. It was as if a part of me, the one that had been silenced for years of sacrifice and giving, was waking up. And when it woke up completely, nothing would be the same again. Because they had no idea what they had just done. They didn't know that everything they had, absolutely everything, had come from me. And they were about to discover this in the worst possible way. In the days following that brutal message, I started doing something I'd never done before. I stopped to really think about everything I had built. Not in a proud way, but in a strategic way, almost clinical. I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and started to list each help, each contribution, each time I was there when they needed me. And the more I wrote, the more I realized a frightening truth. Absolutely everything my children had, everything, had started with me. Robert's house, my oldest son, only exists because I gave the down payment. Jennifer's diplomas hanging on her wall. I paid for every tuition. The car that allowed Michael to start working, it was mine. Everything came from me. I remember when Robert married Sarah, that gold-digger daughter-in-law who always looked down on me. They didn't have the money for the apartment down payment. They came to me with that story that it was their dream, that they needed to start their life together, that it was a unique opportunity. I didn't even think twice. I took my savings, that money I had saved for years working hard, and gave it to them. I didn't lend it. I gave it. Because mothers don't lend, mothers give. And what was the thanks? At first, some phone calls, some visits. Then, the silence grew, until it reached that cursed message. It's funny how we only realize things when it's too late, right? With Jennifer, it was similar, just worse. She wanted to study business administration at a private university because the public one didn't have the course she wanted. Okay, I understand. Dreams are expensive. For 4 years, I paid for everything. Tuition, materials, transportation, even the clothes for her to go to internships. There were months I had to do side jobs, work extra, just so nothing would be missing. And she graduated, got a good job, started earning well. But you know what happened? Her husband, that gold-digger son-in-law Tom, started putting ideas in her head. He said I demanded too much presence, that I was heavy, that family needs space. And she bought that conversation. My own daughter, Michael, my youngest, was always the most dependent. When he got his first job, he had no way to get there because he lived far away, and public transportation was terrible. I had an old car, but it worked just fine. I gave it to him. Simple as that. Mom, I promise I'll pay you back, he said at the time. I laughed and replied, "Son, Mom doesn't want payment. Mom wants to see you well." What an idiot I was, right? Because what I really wanted was respect, consideration, a minimum of gratitude. But those things, apparently, don't come in the package when you raise ungrateful children. The car allowed him to work, save money, build his life. And when he didn't need me anymore? Guess. He disappeared too. But it wasn't just money. I was there in all emergencies. When Sarah had complications in her pregnancy and Robert panicked, who stayed at the hospital with them all night? Me. When Jennifer had that anxiety crisis and needed someone to take care of the kids for a week, who dropped everything and went? Me. When Michael crashed his car and didn't have money to fix it, who paid the mechanic? Me. Always me. It was as if I were a tool, you know? Useful when they needed, stored in the closet when they didn't. And the worst part is I accepted this role for years. I normalized being treated like this. What an idiotic elderly mother I was. The daughters-in-law were always the real problem, I realized. Sarah and Lisa, Michael's wife, were cut from the same cloth. Both Caucasian, from families that never had to sacrifice for anything. They saw my help not as generosity, but as obligation. Worse, as weakness. I remember Sarah saying once, thinking I hadn't heard, "Mother-in-law who helps too much ends up hindering, creates dependency." Dependency? I created the comfortable life she has today. But for her, accepting help from an elderly mother like me was humiliating. She wanted to be able to say she had conquered everything alone, together with her husband. My participation spoiled her narrative. I also started noticing that my children grew up thinking all that was normal. That mom was there for that, to give, to solve, to facilitate. They never stopped to think where the money came from, how much I sacrificed, how many times I stopped doing something for myself to be able to help them. I raised adults who confuse love with obligation, who think that, because you're a mother, you have to be available always, in any situation, without expecting anything in return. And look, I didn't expect anything material, but a minimum of respect, a phone call once in a while, a visit that wasn't just when they needed something. Was that asking too much? Sitting there with my notebook full of notes, I understood that I had created a system where I was essential but invisible. My children and their wives lived in a bubble of comfort that I had built, but they refused to recognize who sustained everything. It was easier to believe they did it alone. It was prettier, more dignified. Admitting that the elderly mother was the foundation of everything, that didn't fit the image they wanted to project, especially the daughters-in-law, who made a point of posting on social media about achievements and their own merits, always forgetting to mention where the initial push came from. The clarity hurt more than the rejection itself, because it made me see that I had been an accomplice in my own devaluation. I accepted being used. I allowed them to treat me like an inexhaustible source of resources, without ever demanding the minimum reciprocity. And now, when they probably thought they didn't need me anymore, they discarded me. It was that simple, like someone throwing away an old appliance that still works, but no longer matches the new house decor. This emotional story I was living taught me a brutal lesson. You teach people how to treat you, and I had taught my children that they could do anything to me. But you know what's interesting? While I was making these notes, while I mentally reviewed each situation, each help, each sacrifice, something inside me started to change. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It wasn't just pain. It was something colder, more calculated. It was the clear perception that I had power, much more power than they imagined. Because if everything came from me, if I was the foundation of everything they built, then I could also be the cause of the collapse. They discarded me thinking I was dispensable. They were about to discover how wrong they were. I closed the notebook and looked out the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and red. Beautiful, but somehow threatening. It was as if the universe was telling me that something was about to change. And it was. Because for the first time in my life, I was going to stop being the mother who accepts everything, who forgives everything, who sacrifices for everything. I was going to stop being the invisible woman who sustains everything behind the scenes. They wanted me to disappear? Well then, I was going to disappear, but I was going to take with me everything that was mine. And the consequences of that? The consequences were going to be much more severe than any of them could imagine. The exclusion didn't stop at that cruel message. It spread, became public, turned into a humiliation that everyone could see. It was on a Saturday morning that I started to notice. I was having my coffee, trying to distract my mind with the newspaper, when I decided to open Instagram. Mistake. Huge mistake. The first thing that appeared on my feed was a photo of Jennifer, all smiles, in a fancy restaurant. The caption said, "Perfect family lunch." I clicked on the photo to see better. There they all were: Robert, Sarah, Michael, Lisa, the grandchildren, everyone, except me. My heart sank in my chest. They had gotten together, had celebrated something, and I didn't even know. Worse, they made a point of posting, as if I didn't exist anymore. I started scrolling through the feed compulsively, like someone slowly ripping off a Band-Aid just to feel more pain. And I found more, much more. Photos from my grandson's birthday, the one who always called me grandma and hugged me tight. Beautiful party, huge cake, impeccable decoration. I didn't know there was going to be a party. Nobody told me. In the comments, people wrote, "What a beautiful family. Special moments with those we love. God bless you all." Each word was a stab, because I wasn't there. I, who had always been present in everything, had been erased. And they did this without any shame, without any embarrassment, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. There were more photos: a barbecue at Robert's house, a walk in the park with the grandchildren, a game night that apparently became a tradition on Sundays, all without me. Each post was a celebration of my absence. And you know what hurt me most? The falsely happy comments, people reacting with hearts, with applause, with affectionate messages. Nobody asked, "Where's your mother?" Or, "And grandma, didn't she go?" It was as if I had never existed, as if my presence during all those years hadn't left any mark. I was a ghost they had decided not to see anymore. And they were comfortable with that. The shame started consuming me in a way I didn't expect. It wasn't just sadness, it was humiliation. Because people in my social circle also saw those photos, and they started asking. Mrs. Margaret, my neighbor for 20 years, stopped me on the sidewalk. "I saw the photos from your grandson's birthday. What a beautiful party. You couldn't go?" I froze. What was I going to say? That my own children excluded me? That I wasn't invited? That I'm an elderly mother discarded by my own family? So I lied. "Oh, I was a bit under the weather. Thought it best not to go so I wouldn't pass it to anyone," I replied, forcing a smile. She believed it, but I felt even smaller. Because now, besides being excluded, I was a liar. The lies multiplied. When Diane from church asked why I wasn't in the photos from the barbecue, I made up that I had an unavoidable commitment. When Mr. Peterson from the market commented that my family seemed very close on social media, I just smiled and agreed, swallowing my tears. Each lie was a piece of me dying. I was protecting their image, protecting the farce that we were a happy family, while they publicly exposed me as disposable. And worse, I did this because I felt shame. Shame of admitting I had raised ungrateful children. Shame of being that mother nobody wants around. There was a specific moment that almost destroyed me. It was on Sarah's birthday, my gold-digger daughter-in-law. She threw a huge party, full of people, and posted dozens of photos. In one of them, she was hugging her mother with a caption that said, "My queen, my example, my foundation. Thank you for everything, Mom." When I read that, something inside me broke, because I had been Robert's foundation, had been the queen who solved their problems, had been the example of giving. But there she was, giving all the credit to her mother, while I was erased. The hypocrisy was so glaring, I almost laughed, almost, because deep down, I just wanted to cry. I stopped opening social media after a while, not because the pain had passed, but because I couldn't take it anymore. Each photo was confirmation that I was no longer part of that story, and my children's silence about all of it was deafening. They posted, they celebrated, they built memories, and I was out, completely out. It was at that moment that something started to crystallize inside me. It wasn't just hurt anymore. It was clarity, a cold and sharp clarity. I realized that continuing to try to belong, continuing to hope they'd change their minds, was humiliating myself even more. It was accepting that role of disposable mother they had given me. The pain started transforming into something else, into anger, perhaps, but not that explosive and uncontrolled anger. It was a calculated, lucid anger. It was the perception that I had two options. Either I continued being the invisible victim of this emotional story, or I took the reins of the situation. And look, I'll be honest with you. I was tired of being a victim, tired of crying alone, tired of making up excuses to protect the image of those who discarded me, tired of being the elderly mother who accepts anything just to not lose her children. Because the truth is, I had already lost them. They had made the choice. Now it was my turn. I started thinking strategically. If they could publicly exclude me, if they could celebrate my absence without any remorse, then I could also make choices. Choices they weren't going to like, choices that were going to hurt. Because there's one thing they forgot. Everything they have, everything that allows those parties, those lunches, that comfortable life, came from me. And if it came from me, I had the power to take it away. Not out of revenge, not out of meanness, but out of self-preservation. Because nobody deserves to be treated like garbage by their own family. Nobody. I looked in the mirror that night and saw a different woman. Older, yes. More tired, for sure. But also stronger. More determined. The eyes that stared back at me were no longer those of a victim. They were those of someone who had woken up. Someone who had realized that dignity isn't something you ask for. It's something you demand. And I was about to demand mine. In a way they would never forget. Because if there's one thing I learned from this total humiliation, it's that sometimes you need to lose everything to understand what really matters. And what mattered now wasn't love anymore, wasn't family anymore. It was respect. And I was going to get it, even if it was in the most painful way possible. The gears in my head started turning. Plans started forming. Numbers, documents, papers, everything started making sense in a new way. I wasn't going to keep waiting for them to include me. I wasn't going to keep begging for affection. I was going to do something I should have done a long time ago, put myself first. And when I did that, when I really acted, the comfortable life they built on my back was going to crumble like a house of cards. They thought they could discard me and continue living well? They were terribly mistaken, and they were about to find out. This time, it was going to be different. It wasn't going to be like all those other times when I got hurt and then forgave, when I cried and then went back to helping. No. This time, something inside me had changed, irreversibly. I woke up one Monday morning with a clarity that even scared me. I had no more doubts, no more that little voice telling me, "But they're your children, you can't do this." Yes, I could, and I was going to. Unlike all those other situations where I had swallowed the pain and moved forward, now I was going to act, and I was going to act definitively, without room for regret or negotiation. They had taught me that family can discard family. Now I was going to show them the consequences of that. The first thing I did was call Dr. Harrison, a lawyer who had helped me years ago with buying my house. I scheduled a consultation for that same week. When I arrived at his office, he received me with that usual kind smile. "Mrs. Helen, what a nice surprise. What can I do for you?" I took a deep breath and said, "I need to undo everything I built for my children. Everything. And I need it to be legal, definitive, and impossible to reverse." His expression changed. It became serious, concerned. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. I looked him in the eyes and replied with a firmness I didn't even know I had. "Absolutely." During the following weeks, I worked with Dr. Harrison to organize every detail. The down payment I had given for Robert's house, it was a documented loan he had never paid back. Yes, I had kept all the receipts, all the bank statements. I had always been organized, even when it seemed I was just giving without thinking. Michael's car? It was still in my name. I had never transferred it because he always said he'd do it later. Well, now there wasn't going to be a later. And the bills I still paid to help Jennifer and Tom, that gold digger son-in-law, all would be canceled. Every thread that connected me to them financially would be cut, all at once, without warning. There was more, much more. I discovered I was a guarantor on two important contracts, a car financing for Sarah and a loan Michael had taken out to expand his business. As guarantor, I had rights, and I was going to use every one of them. Dr. Harrison explained everything to me in minute detail: how to remove my name, how to demand immediate settlements, how to activate guarantees I had forgotten existed. It was meticulous, surgical work, and for the first time in a long time, I felt in control. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. It was freeing myself from chains I myself had put on. I also organized everything related to shared assets. There was a piece of land I had bought with Robert years ago, when he had that idea of building houses to sell. The land was valued now, worth much more. But it was in both our names. I asked Dr. Harrison to initiate the process of compulsory sale of my part. If Robert wanted to keep everything, he'd have to pay me half of the current market value, a value I knew he didn't have. And if he didn't pay, the land would be auctioned. Simple as that. Each decision I made was like ripping off a Band-Aid. It hurt, but it was necessary, and I wasn't going to stop halfway. The whole process took almost 2 months. 2 months of meetings with lawyers, signing papers, reviewing documents. My children knew nothing. They kept ignoring me, kept posting their perfect lives on social media, kept acting as if I didn't exist, and I let them. Because the more time passed without them knowing, the more prepared I got. There wasn't going to be room for negotiation, for tears, for empty promises of change. When they found out, it would be too late. Everything would already be done, signed, sealed, irreversible. And that word had never been so beautiful to me, irreversible. There were moments of weakness, I won't lie. There were nights when I looked at old photos, at happy moments, and thought, am I exaggerating? Should an elderly mother really do this to her own children? But then I remembered the message. Don't show up anymore. I remembered the photos where I had been erased. I remembered the public humiliation, the lies they spread about me, the attempts to make me look like the villain. And the weakness passed. Because it wasn't an exaggeration. It was proportional. They discarded me when they thought they didn't need me anymore. They discovered in the worst possible way that they were wrong. And that lesson, as painful as it was necessary. Maybe the most necessary one they'd ever have in their entire lives. Dr. Harrison was impressed with my determination. In our last meeting, he said, Mrs. Helen, in 40 years of law practice, I've never seen a client so decided. Are you sure you don't want to warn them first? Give them a chance to talk? I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a bitter laugh. Doctor, they had every chance in the world. I spent weeks waiting for a message, a phone call, an explanation. Nothing came. Now, their chance is over. Execute everything as we planned, and you can do this next Monday. He nodded, respectful. I think he understood it wasn't cruelty. It was self-preservation. That weekend, I slept better than I had slept in months. I didn't have that anguish in my chest anymore, that constant anxiety. I had peace, a strange peace, kind of cold, but peace. Because I knew I had done everything right, everything legal, everything documented. There was no way to reverse it. There was no way they could accuse me of doing something illegal or wrong. I was simply claiming what was mine, withdrawing my support from those who had decided they didn't want me around anymore. And if that was going to crumble their comfortable life, well, they should have thought about that before sending me that message. On Monday morning, Dr. Harrison started executing the plan. Notifications were sent, documents were filed, contracts were activated. And me? I went to the park, sat on a bench and watched people passing by. Children playing, couples walking, elderly people feeding pigeons. Life went on normally for everyone. And for me it was going to go on too, just in a completely new way. My ungrateful children didn't know yet, but their lives were about to be turned upside down. And this time, there wasn't going to be Mom to run and fix things. Because Mom had learned, in the worst possible way, that sometimes you need to let people fall for them to understand who was really holding them up. I came home that afternoon with a strange feeling. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't sadness. It was resolution. It was the certainty that I had done the right thing, even though it was the hardest thing. I looked at my phone. No messages yet. They didn't know anything. But in a few hours, when the notifications started arriving, when they realized what was happening, everything was going to change. And for the first time in this whole emotional story, I wasn't afraid of the consequences. I was curious to see how they were going to react when they discovered that the elderly mother they had discarded was, in fact, the only thing keeping their house of cards standing. The consequences started arriving much faster than I imagined. On Tuesday morning, my phone started vibrating frantically. There were messages, calls, everything at the same time, but I didn't answer. I let each notification accumulate, each call go to voicemail. I sat in my armchair, drinking tea, listening to the phone ring and ring. It was almost poetic. For weeks, I had begged for a response from them, for an explanation, for any sign that I mattered. Now, they were the desperate ones. And me? I was at peace, watching the chaos I myself had created. Because finally, after so long, I had control of the situation. The first bomb exploded in Robert's life. The bank had notified him about the loan I had made for the house down payment, the one that was documented and had never been paid. The notification demanded full and immediate payment, with interest and correction accumulated over the years. It was almost $80,000. $80,000 he didn't have. And there was more. Since he didn't pay within the deadline stipulated in the notification, the debt collection process was initiated. His house, that beautiful house where he lived with Sarah and the kids, was at risk of seizure. Within days, everything he thought was his was threatened, and he didn't even know how he got to that point. With Jennifer, it was different, but equally devastating. I had canceled all the bills I still paid to help her and Tom. They were things that seemed small, but that added up made a difference. The grandchildren's health insurance, private school tuition, car insurance, everything cut at once. But the real blow came when she found out about the land. That land I had bought with Robert, that was valued. I had put Jennifer as co-owner years ago, thinking I was guaranteeing her future. Now I was demanding my part, and since she didn't have money either, the land was going to have to be sold. She'd lose the opportunity to build the dream house she'd been planning for years. Michael was the one who suffered the most immediate impact. That loan he had taken out to expand the business, where I was guarantor. I activated my rights and demanded full settlement. The bank, seeing that I had removed myself as guarantee, reassessed his credit risk. The result? They demanded early payment of the entire loan, or would execute the guarantees he had given, the business itself and his car. Michael panicked. He tried to negotiate with the bank, but without me as guarantor, without my financial credibility sustaining him, the doors closed. The business he was so proud of having built was crumbling. And the daughters-in-law? The gold-digger daughters-in-law showed their true faces quickly. Sarah was the first. When she realized Robert was broke, that the house was threatened, that he no longer had that comfortable life, she simply started pulling away. First came the arguments, the accusations. "You're incompetent. How did you let this happen? I didn't get married to go through this." Then came silence. She started sleeping in the guest room, stopped wearing her wedding ring, and one day she simply packed her bags and went to her mother's house, taking the kids. There was no conversation, no attempt to solve things. She jumped ship at the first sign it was sinking. Lisa, Michael's wife, was no different. Worse even. She had married him precisely when the business started prospering. Always liked the good life, expensive dinners, trips, designer clothes. When the money started running out, when bills started being late, she showed who she really was. She started going out alone, appearing at parties without him. People started commenting they saw her with other men. And when Michael, already destroyed emotionally and financially, confronted her, you know what she said? "I'm not obligated to sink with you. Every man for himself." A week later, she was gone, without looking back, without remorse. The desperate phone calls continued, dozens per day. But I didn't answer. I listened to voicemail messages, of course. It was impossible not to listen. Robert crying, literally crying, saying he didn't know that money had to be returned, that he thought it was a gift. Jennifer panicking, talking about the grandchildren, about how they'd have to change schools, about how she couldn't pay for everything alone. Michael, with a choked voice, saying the business was going to close, that he was going to lose everything, that he didn't know what to do. Each message was a cry for help, and I listened to everything in silence, without feeling the guilt they expected me to feel. Because you know what was interesting? In none of these messages did they apologize. In none of them did they acknowledge what they had done to me. Everything was about them, about their needs, about their problems. "Mom, you need to help me. Mom, your grandchildren are going to suffer. Mom, I'm going to lose everything." But where was the "Mom, I'm sorry"? Where was the "Mom, I was wrong to you"? It wasn't there, because even in disgrace, even facing the total humiliation of seeing their lives crumble, they still thought I was obligated to save them. They still thought being a mother meant accepting anything and continuing to give. They were wrong. Their fall was brutal and fast. In less than a month, everything had changed. Robert had to put the house up for sale urgently for a value far below market. just to try to settle the debt. Jennifer had to take the grandchildren out of private school and enroll them in public. Michael saw the business he had built be closed, with debts that would chase him for years. The wives had left, leaving them alone to deal with the consequences. Lawsuits started appearing. Overdue bills accumulated. The desperation was visible even in the text messages I continued receiving and ignoring. It was like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. And look, I won't lie saying I didn't feel anything. I did. But it wasn't guilt. It was a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness because they were my children. After all, I brought them into the world, raised them, loved them. Relief because finally they were understanding, in the most painful way possible, what it meant not to have my support. They had lived years in a bubble of comfort I had created, thinking that was their own merit. Now the bubble had burst, and they were falling hard, without a safety net, because the safety net had always been me, and I wasn't there anymore. This real story was teaching me something I should have learned a long time ago. Sometimes, letting someone fall is the only way for them to learn to walk alone. Sitting in my living room, watching the sunset through the window, I realized I had crossed a line with no return. My children were destroyed, their lives were in pieces, and I was responsible for that. But unlike what they expected, unlike what society would expect from an elderly mother, I wasn't running to save them. I wasn't giving up my dignity again, because finally, after a lifetime putting them first, I had learned a crucial lesson. You can't help those who don't respect you. You can't love those who discard you. And you definitely can't sacrifice your peace for those who destroyed it without thinking twice. When they realized I wasn't going to give in, that I wasn't going to go back, my children changed strategies. If they couldn't soften me with pleas, they were going to try to destroy me with lies. Jennifer was the one who started. She posted on social media a long text, dramatic, full of half-truths and complete distortions. She said I was a vengeful mother, that I had abandoned the grandchildren, that I was using money as a weapon to hurt my own children. She painted a scenario where she was the innocent victim of a cruel and resentful woman. The comments started appearing. How sad. A mother like that doesn't deserve the children she has. Money isn't more important than family. Each word was poison. But I read everything in silence, without reacting. Robert followed the same path. He made a tearful video, recorded in the car because he no longer had the house, talking about how he had been betrayed by his own mother. He told his story the way it suited him. He omitted the cruel message he had sent me, omitted the years of exclusion, omitted everything he had done wrong. In his version, I was simply a bad woman who had decided to destroy the family for selfish reasons. My mother is doing this because she wants to control us, he said in the recording. She doesn't accept that we've grown up, that we have our own lives. The manipulation was so shameless, it was almost impressive. But many people believed it. Michael was the most aggressive. He started spreading rumors in the neighborhood, at church, everywhere I was known. He said I was having mental problems, that I was senile, that I didn't know what I was doing. He insinuated I needed psychiatric help, that I was making irrational decisions because of my age. My elderly mother isn't well, he told anyone who would listen. She needs treatment, not space to do more crazy things. It was a low attempt to discredit me, to make it seem like I was incapable, that my actions were the result of mental instability and not a conscious and planned decision. The narrative they built was convincing, I admit. 3 children, all telling similar versions, all painting the mother as the villain. People who didn't know my story, who didn't know what had really happened, started looking at me differently. At church, some members turned away when they saw me. At the market, conversations stopped when I passed by. Mrs. Margaret, my neighbor of 20 years, stopped me on the street one day and said, "Helen, I heard some things. I hope you and your children can resolve this. Family is sacred, no matter what happens." She wasn't being mean. She was just believing their version. And who could blame her? But here's the thing about lies. They can be convincing at first, but the truth always has a way of appearing, especially when you have documents, proof, concrete evidence of everything. When closer people, those who really knew me, started asking questions, I didn't defend myself with words. I defended myself with facts. I showed them the message. Don't show up anymore. I showed the photos where I had been excluded from family events. I showed the bank receipts of everything I had given, of each financial help, of each bill I paid. The facts spoke louder than any manipulated narrative. The first person to understand was Pastor David. He had come to me, concerned about the rumors, wanting to mediate the situation. I sat with him and simply opened my heart, but more importantly, opened my documents. I showed everything: the exclusion message, the bank statements, the legal notifications, the complete history. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Helen, I didn't know. I'm sorry for believing without questioning." He wasn't the only one who was going to change his mind. The truth was starting to leak out, and when the truth comes to light, lies crumble quickly. Other people started connecting the dots. Diane from church remembered that months ago I had stopped appearing at family events suddenly. Mr. Peterson from the market commented that he had always found it strange my children posted so many celebrations without ever including me. Mrs. Margaret, after seeing the evidence I started discreetly sharing, was horrified. "They did this to you? After everything you did for them?" The tide was turning, and my children noticed it, but it was too late. Their image was starting to crack, and cracks, once started, only expand. Their attempt to blame me started turning against themselves. People started asking uncomfortable questions in the comments on their posts. "Why don't you mention the message you sent your mother? Where are the photos with her in recent months? If she was always so bad, why did you accept her money?" Each question was a stab in the false narrative they tried to build. Sarah, who had already abandoned Robert, gave an informal interview on social media where she let slip, "I always warned him that depending so much on his mother-in-law would cause problems, but he never wanted to listen." Without meaning to, she confirmed exactly what I had been saying. They depended on me, totally. The public humiliation they tried to impose on me was turning against them. Comments on social media changed tone. "What ungrateful children. After everything the mother did, they treat her like this. This is absurd. She's just claiming what's hers." Public opinion, that same one that at first had condemned me, was now on my side. And you know why? Because the truth always comes out. Always. You can distort, you can manipulate, you can lie. But when facts are presented, when proof is shown, no narrative can sustain itself, and their narrative was crumbling spectacularly. Their own friends started pulling away. Couples who used to go out with Robert and Sarah stopped calling. Jennifer's co-workers started treating her differently after the real story leaked. Michael's social circle shrank drastically when they discovered he had spread lies about his own mother having mental problems just to get out of the consequences of his own mistakes. Their credibility, both socially and professionally, was being destroyed. And it wasn't me doing this. It was the natural consequence of having chosen to lie instead of taking responsibility. Sitting at home, reading the messages of support I now received from people who had understood the situation, I realized something important. Justice doesn't need to be loud. It can be silent, firm, based on facts. I didn't need to scream, didn't need to defend myself desperately. I just needed to present the truth and let it do the work. My children had tried to turn me into the villain of this emotional story, but they failed. Because you can't make someone look bad when that person has decades of good deeds, of generosity, of genuine love. And you definitely can't when that person has all the proof that you're the real culprit. The world was giving them back exactly what they had offered: exclusion, judgment, and contempt. It was on a rainy Thursday afternoon that the inevitable confrontation happened. I was at home, organizing some things, when the doorbell rang insistently. I looked out the window and saw Robert. He was drenched, had clearly walked in the rain, and the expression on his face was one of absolute desperation. My first instinct was not to open, but something made me go to the door. Maybe curiosity, maybe the need to close that cycle once and for all. I opened the door, and there he was, my oldest son, the man I once held in my lap, now destroyed, crying in front of me. "Mom, please," was all he could say before breaking down in tears. I let him in, more out of pity than desire to talk. He came in, stumbling, dripping water on the floor, trembling. I don't know if it was from the cold or from desperation. Probably both. He sat on the couch, the same couch where we spent so many afternoons watching movies when he was a child, and buried his face in his hands. "Mom, I lost everything," he said between sobs. "The house, Sarah. The boys barely talk to me. I'm living in a rented room. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I don't know what to do. I looked at him in silence. Part of me, that maternal part that never completely dies, felt pain, but the stronger part, the one that had been hurt and humiliated, remained firm. He started talking nonstop as if the words had been dammed up for weeks. He talked about how everything collapsed too fast, about how he hadn't realized how much he depended on me, about how Sarah had shown her true face and abandoned him at the first sign of difficulty. That gold-digger daughter-in-law never really loved me, he said bitterly. She loved what I could offer, and when I couldn't offer anything anymore, she just left. I could have said, "I told you so," could have rubbed it in his face that I always knew who Sarah really was. But I didn't say anything. I just listened, with a neutral expression that seemed to make him even more desperate. Then he changed tactics. The tears stopped a bit, and he looked directly into my eyes. "Mom, I know I made mistakes. I know I treated you badly, but you can't do this to me. I'm your son. Your ungrateful son, maybe, but I'm still your son." He got up from the couch and, to my complete surprise, knelt in front of me. Actually knelt, like someone begging for mercy. "Please, Mom, help me just this one more time. I promise I'll change, that I'll be different, that I'll value you. Just help me get out of this situation. Please." The words came out rushed, desperate, but there was something about them that bothered me deeply. I realized what it was. Even there, even kneeling, even crying, he was still demanding. Help me. Not, "I'm sorry. I need you." Not, "I was wrong to you." Even at rock bottom, the mentality was the same. I existed to solve his problems. There was no real acknowledgement of what he had done, no understanding of the pain he had caused. There was only his need, and that perception left me cold. I let him finish talking, begging, promising changes we both knew wouldn't come. When he finally fell silent, exhausted, I spoke, and my words were carefully chosen, each one of them. "Robert, do you remember the message?" I asked calmly. He looked confused. "What message?" I grabbed my phone, opened the family group that had been silent for months, and showed it to him. "Don't show up anymore." He read it and turned pale. "Mom, that was a moment of anger. I raised my hand, interrupting. "You didn't what? Didn't mean it? Didn't think about the consequences? Didn't imagine I'd take it seriously?" I paused. "You expelled me from the family. You erased me from your story. You excluded me from everything. And now you come here, not to apologize, but to ask for help. Again." My voice was firm, without anger, but loaded with a truth he couldn't contest. He tried to explain himself, stumbling over his words. "Mom, it was Sarah who wrote that. She was angry because you criticized the way she treated the children. I just let it go because I was tired of the fights between you two." I looked at him and shook my head. "Robert, you didn't write the message, but you agreed with it. You saw it. You read it, and you did nothing. Worse, you participated in the exclusion. All those parties, those lunches, those celebrations without me. You were there. You posted the photos. You knew exactly what you were doing." He had no answer for that. Because it was true, and the truth sometimes is the cruelest thing there is. I got up from the chair, forcing him to look up while he was still kneeling. And then I said something I had been building in my mind for weeks, something simple but devastating. "You expelled me from the family." I just obeyed. The silence that followed was deafening. He looked at me with an expression of shock, as if he was finally understanding the magnitude of what he had done. "Mom, no," he started, but I was already moving away, walking toward the door. "Robert, this conversation is over. You need to leave now." My voice left no room for negotiation. There was no possible discussion. There was no going back. He got up stumbling, still trying to talk, still trying to somehow reverse that situation. "Mom, you can't do this. I'm your son. You have an obligation to help me." And there it was, his true nature appearing even in desperation. Obligation, as if being a mother meant being an emotional and financial slave to your children forever, regardless of how they treat you. I opened the door and pointed outside. "I have no obligation to those who discarded me. Now please, leave my house." He looked at me with a mixture of anger and desperation, but realized there was nothing more to do there. He passed by me without looking, going back to the rain that continued falling outside. I stood at the door, watching him walk away. His shoulders were hunched, His posture was one of total defeat. Part of me wanted to call him back, wanted to hug him like I did when he was little and had some problem. But the stronger part, the one that had learned to value herself, to respect herself, remained firm. I closed the door slowly and leaned against it for a moment. I didn't cry. I didn't feel guilty. I just felt immense relief because that final confrontation had been necessary. It had been the moment when he realized definitively that there was no going back, that the mother he knew, the one who always gave in, always forgave, always saved, no longer existed. I went back to the living room and sat in the same chair where I had been during the entire conversation. I looked at the water stains on the floor, physical reminders of that encounter, and I realized I had crossed the final line. There were no more doubts, no more weaknesses. My ungrateful children had had every chance to do differently, to choose another path, and they chose wrong. Now they lived with the consequences. And me? I lived with the peace of someone who had finally chosen their own dignity above everything. This emotional story was far from over, but that specific chapter had closed, and I was ready to write the next ones, this time thinking about myself. Finally. Months passed since that confrontation in the rain, and unlike what many people expected, there was no quick reconciliation. There wasn't that movie ending where everyone hugs crying and goes back to being a happy family. Real life doesn't work like that. The consequences of what they did and what I did in response were too deep to be resolved with some nice words and empty promises. I followed from afar, through acquaintances, through comments that reached me, how my children's lives had changed permanently. And it was exactly that, permanent. There was no quick fix. There was no going back to what it was before. They had to learn to live in a completely new reality. Robert was the one who fell the deepest. After losing the house, seeing the marriage crumble, having Sarah take the children and prevent him from seeing his kids frequently, he entered a spiral of deep depression. I learned from someone from church that he had sought psychological help, that he was taking medication, that there were days he couldn't get out of bed. His job, which had always been stable, started being affected. Absences, tardiness, poor performance, until inevitably came the dismissal. And then? How does a man in his 40s, with a tarnished resume, without good references, manage to start over? The answer is, with great difficulty. He was living from odd jobs, temporary work, surviving more than living. Jennifer perhaps was the one who tried hardest to keep up appearances. But appearances only work when you have resources to sustain them, and she didn't have them anymore. The children in public school cried because they missed their friends from private school. Tom, that gold-digger son-in-law, started blaming her for everything. "It was your mother who did this to us," he said, conveniently forgetting that it was he who had helped push me away, who had put ideas in Jennifer's head about me being heavy and controlling. Their marriage was hanging by a thread. Constant fights, doors slamming, nights sleeping separately. The apartment where they lived needed urgent repairs they couldn't afford. Everything was slowly deteriorating. Michael was the one who lost the most visibly. The business he had built, the one he was so proud of, went completely bankrupt. He had to close the doors, lay off employees, face lawsuits from creditors. Lisa, his ex-wife, was already in another relationship, posting happy photos with a new man on social media. This destroyed him emotionally. He started drinking too much, isolating himself, pushing away even the few friends who remained. He went back to living with friends, sharing an apartment as if he were a 20-year-old, not a man in his late 30s. The humiliation of having to start from scratch, of seeing everything he built turn to dust, was visible in every photo that circulated, in every report that reached me. What impressed me most wasn't just their financial fall, it was the emotional destruction. They had lived so long in a comfort zone, sustained by me without even realizing it, that when that support was removed, they simply didn't know how to deal with it. They didn't know how to manage on their own. They hadn't developed resilience, emotional strength, ability to face adversity, because they never needed to. I was always there, solving, facilitating, sustaining, and now they were truly alone. And loneliness, when you've never had to face it before, can be absolutely devastating. That's what was happening to each of them, in different ways, but equally painful. The social consequences were also irreversible. Their reputation in that community where we had always lived was tarnished. People knew the story. They knew they had treated their elderly mother cruelly, that they had been ungrateful children, that they had tried to blame the victim when things turned against them. And in a small community, reputation is everything. Job opportunities were harder to get. Social invitations decreased drastically. Even at church, where before they were well regarded, now they were treated with a cold, distant cordiality. Nobody wants to associate with people known for treating their own mother badly. It's a kind of mark that doesn't come off easily. Their relationships with each other also became shaken. Robert blamed Jennifer for agreeing with the exclusion. Jennifer blamed Michael for spreading lies about me. Michael blamed both for not supporting him when everything collapsed. They had united to exclude me, but when the storm came, they separated. There were no more those family lunches, those celebrations all together. Each one was isolated in their own disgrace, dealing alone with the consequences of choices they made together. The irony was cruel. They excluded me to strengthen the bond between them, but in the end, they lost me and lost each other too. And me? How did I feel seeing all this? I won't lie saying it didn't hurt. It did. They were my children, after all. I brought them into the world, raised them, loved them, but the pain didn't come accompanied by guilt. Not anymore. I had done the right thing. I had defended myself, had preserved my dignity, had demanded the respect I deserved. If the consequences were severe, it was because their lack of respect had also been severe. Cause and consequence, action and reaction. They planted neglect and reaped loneliness. They planted ingratitude and reaped abandonment. Life has those things. You can't treat people badly and expect them to continue sustaining you. There were moments when I asked myself if I had exaggerated, if it couldn't have been different. But then I remembered the message. Don't show up anymore. I remembered the photos where I had been erased. I remembered the public humiliation, the lies they spread about me, the attempts to make me look like the villain. And the doubt passed, because it hadn't been an exaggeration. It had been proportional. They discarded me when they thought they didn't need me anymore. They discovered, in the worst possible way, that they were wrong. And that lesson, as painful as it was necessary. Maybe the most necessary one they'd have in their entire lives. I started living my life in a completely different way. I no longer waited for phone calls that didn't come. I no longer stalked social media to see what they were doing. I was no longer trapped in that constant pain of having been rejected. I started doing things for myself. Small things at first, reading books I had set aside, cooking new recipes just because I wanted to, walking in the park without hurry. Gradually, I rediscovered who I was beyond being a mother. And you know something? I like that person. I like the Helen who didn't live for others, who didn't sacrifice herself until she erased herself. This new version of me was lighter, freer. The truth is that those months showed something I should have understood a long time ago. You can't force people to value you. You can't beg for respect. Either they give it to you, or you walk away. And I had walked away. And by walking away, I had discovered that I could breathe better away from them than close to them, that my peace was worth more than any forced reconciliation, that forgiveness doesn't mean going back, doesn't mean accepting again, doesn't mean giving more chances. Forgiveness can simply mean letting go, releasing, moving forward. And that's what I was doing, each day a little more. This real story had transformed me in ways I never imagined. And as painful as the path had been, I was grateful for the person I was becoming. It had been almost 6 months since everything started when my phone vibrated with a notification from the family group, that same group that had been the stage for the message that changed everything. My heart raced, not from hope, but from reflex. I grabbed the phone kind of scared, kind of curious, and what I saw surprised me in a way I didn't expect. It was a long message from Robert, and this time, there were no accusations, no desperate requests for help, no manipulation attempts. There were only honest, raw, painful words. Mom, I need to say some things, and I know I don't have the right to expect you to read them, but I need to write them anyway. My finger hesitated over the screen, but I kept reading. He continued, I was an ungrateful son. There's no other way to say this. For years, you sustained my life, my choices, my dreams. And I simply accepted everything as if it were my right, as if you had an obligation to do that. Worse, when I thought I didn't need you anymore, when my life seemed stable, I let them exclude you. I let them hurt you. I participated in that. And the most painful truth of all? I didn't even realize at the time how wrong I was. I only realized when I lost everything, when I saw everything collapse. And then I understood. Everything I had, absolutely everything, came from you. Your foundation, your sweat, your sacrifice. And I threw that away, as if it were worth nothing. Then came a message from Jennifer. My eyes were already tearing up, but I forced myself to continue. Mom, I'm ashamed. Ashamed of having listened to Tom saying you were heavy, that you interfered too much, that we needed distance. Ashamed of having believed him, instead of trusting you. You were never heavy. You were present. And I confused presence with intrusion because it was easier to believe that than to recognize how much I depended on you. The boys ask about you all the time. Where's Grandma, they say, and I don't know what to answer, because the truth is that Grandma is far away because their mother was a horrible daughter, a daughter who didn't deserve to have a mother like you. Michael was the last to write, and his words were the hardest to read. Mom, I lost everything. The business, the marriage, my dignity. But you know what hurts most? Knowing I lost you, and that it was me who caused it. I who spread lies, who tried to make you look bad, who said you had mental problems. I did all that because I couldn't accept that the failure was mine, that my wrong choices brought me here. It was easier to blame my elderly mother than to look in the mirror and see the weak man I had become. You gave me a car, gave me opportunities, gave me unconditional love, and I returned that with ingratitude and cruelty. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand everything. The 3 messages were there, public in the family group, for anyone to see. They weren't private messages, full of hidden excuses. They were public confessions, acknowledging everything they had done wrong, acknowledging that I had been the foundation of everything, acknowledging the total humiliation they caused me, acknowledging they were ungrateful children, that they had gold-digger daughters-in-law and sons-in-law who helped push me away, that they treated an elderly mother cruelly and unjustifiably. Each word was sincere. I could feel it. It didn't have that tone of manipulative desperation anymore. It had genuine remorse, true guilt, and for the first time since everything started, they were taking responsibility. I stared at those messages for a long time. I reread them several times, looking for signs of falsehood, of manipulation, of that old tactic of saying what I wanted to hear to get something, but I didn't find any. The messages were different, mature, honest, in a painful way. They weren't asking for money. They weren't asking me to solve their problems. They were just acknowledging, assuming, apologizing without expectations, and that was new, completely new. For the first time, they were acting like adults responsible for their own choices. Not like children expecting mom to fix everything. I took 2 days to respond, not because I was thinking about what to say, but because I needed to be sure that my response would come from the right place, not from anger, not from hurt, but from clarity. When I finally wrote, I kept it simple. I read your messages, all of them. I appreciate the honesty. I hope you're capable of transforming these words into action, because words are easy. Real changes are difficult. I'm going to observe. Not the words, but the attitudes, and we'll see. I sent it and turned off my phone. I didn't want to keep waiting for responses, analyzing reactions. I had said what I needed to say. The rest was up to them. In the following weeks, something surprising started happening. They started showing up. Not all together, not in a coordinated way, separately. Robert was the first. He knocked on my door on a Tuesday morning. When I opened it, he was different, thinner, older, but also more humble. Mom, I didn't come to ask for anything. I just came to ask for forgiveness, personally, as I should have done months ago. He didn't try to come in. He stood there at the door, waiting for my reaction. I looked at him and saw, finally, genuine remorse. Come in, I said, and we talked, really, without masks, without manipulations. He told me how difficult it had been, how he had sought therapy, how he was trying to rebuild his life. He didn't ask for help. He just shared. And when he left, we hugged. It was brief, but it was sincere. Jennifer came a few days later. She brought the grandchildren. They ran to me yelling, "Grandma!" and hugged me with that strength only children have. I cried. I hadn't seen them in so long. They were bigger, more grown up. and I felt a pang of sadness for everything I had lost. But Jennifer didn't try to use the grandchildren as bargaining chips. After they went to play in the backyard, she sat with me and asked for forgiveness. "Mom, I was a coward. I chose Tom instead of you. And now I realize I was choosing someone who never really valued me. You always valued me, and I threw that away." We talked for hours, about everything, about the hurts, about the mistakes, about the future, and in the end, I said something important. "Jennifer, I forgive you." But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, nor does it mean going back. Michael was the last. He showed up on a Friday night, visibly nervous. He didn't try to justify himself, didn't try to minimize what he had done. He simply apologized. "Mom, I spread horrible lies about you. I tried to destroy your reputation to save mine, and there's no excuse for that. None. I just need you to know I regret it. Deeply." We were silent for a while. Then I said, "Michael, I accept your apologies, but you need to understand something. Trust is built over years and destroyed in seconds. You destroyed mine, and rebuilding that will take time. A lot of time, if it's even possible." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I know, Mom. I know. I forgave them all. Yes, I forgave them. Because holding a grudge was only hurting me. Because this emotional story had taught me that forgiveness is liberation, not reconciliation. But I made it very clear, forgiveness isn't return. Forgiveness doesn't mean things will go back to the way they were. It doesn't mean I'm going to go back to being that mother who solves everything, who sustains everything, who sacrifices for everything. That woman died, and in her place was born someone stronger, more aware, more determined to live for herself. My children had asked for forgiveness. They received it. But my plans? My plans remained intact. I wasn't going to go back on the decisions I had made. I wasn't going to undo what had been done, because this wasn't about punishment. It was about protecting myself from being discarded again. 3 months after those requests for forgiveness, I made a decision nobody expected. To move. To leave that city where I had spent my entire life, where every corner held a memory, where every familiar face brought a piece of the past. I wasn't running away. I was choosing to start over. I chose a southern state, a small, quiet coastal town that I had visited years ago and had never forgotten. I told my children on a Sunday afternoon, in a brief but firm conversation, "I'm moving. I already bought a house there. I'm going to start a new life." Their reaction was surprise, of course, but they didn't try to stop me. I think they had finally understood that I no longer needed their approval for anything. The move was liberating in a way I didn't expect. Each box I packed was like closing a chapter. Each piece of furniture I sold or donated was letting go of a weight. I didn't take everything, just the essentials. Family photos were stored in an album, no longer scattered throughout the house. The gifts my children had given me over the years were donated, not out of anger, but because I didn't want to live surrounded by memories that tied me to the past. I wanted space, physical and emotional space, to build something new. And when the moving truck left, with my things inside, I left too, without looking back. Literally. The new house was perfect. Small, cozy, with a porch facing the ocean. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. Completely mine. Paid with my money, decorated my way, without having to consider anyone else's tastes or opinions. Waking up in the morning and hearing the sound of the waves, feeling the sea breeze coming through the window, was one of the most invigorating sensations I've ever had. It was as if each breath in that place reminded me, "You're alive. You have the right to be happy. You don't need anyone's permission for that." And I was starting to really believe it. The first days were about adapting, getting to know the local market, discovering where the pharmacy was, learning the bus schedules. Simple things that, for an elderly mother starting over alone, seemed like small victories, and they were. Each thing I discovered alone, each problem I solved without help, made me feel more capable, more independent. For so many years, I had been defined by the role of mother, provider, pillar of the family. Now, I was just being Helen, a woman in her 60s, rediscovering who she was beyond all those labels. And I was liking this discovery. I started taking care of myself in a way I had never done before. I scheduled medical appointments I had been postponing for years. I discovered my blood pressure was high, that my cholesterol levels needed attention, that I had developed mild arthritis that could be controlled. I started taking my medications properly, following medical recommendations, treating my body with the respect it deserved. I changed my diet too. Less fried food, more salads, more fruits. It wasn't a diet to lose weight. It was care. It was self-love. It was understanding that if I didn't take care of myself, nobody else was going to do it for me. And that perception, as obvious as it seems, was revolutionary. Walks on the beach became routine. Every day at the end of the afternoon, I put on my sneakers and walked on the sand. At first, it was just 15 minutes, then half an hour, then an hour. My body, which had been sedentary for so long, started responding. Less pain, more energy, better mood. And during those walks, I thought, I reflected about life, about choices, about everything that had happened, but not in an anguished way, in a peaceful way, like someone organizing the drawers of the mind, putting everything in its place. And gradually, peace settled in, a deep peace that came from within, not from external circumstances. The local community welcomed me in a surprising way. I started attending a craft group that met every Wednesday at the town church. Women of all ages, each with her story, each with her scars. Nobody knew me there. Nobody knew about my past, my pain, my story with my ungrateful children. I was just the new Helen, the one who had moved from the north, and that freedom of being unknown, of being able to build a new first impression, was incredibly liberating. I made genuine friendships based on who I was now, not on who I had been. I also got involved in volunteer work. Once a week, I helped at a support house for elderly people who had no family. Ironic, right? An elderly mother who had been discarded by her own family now caring for other elderly people in the same situation. But it wasn't ironic. It was therapeutic. Each story I heard, each hand I held, each smile I received from those people reminded me that I had value, that my presence mattered, that I could make a difference in someone's life simply by being present. And that healed pieces of me I didn't even know were broken. My children called from time to time. Not every day, not every week, but they called. Short, respectful conversations. They asked how I was, shared news about their lives, sent photos of the grandchildren. I responded with affection, but also with clear boundaries. I didn't get involved in their problems. I didn't offer solutions. I didn't go back to the role of savior. I just listened, advised when they asked, and went on with my life. The relationship now existed in healthy terms, without dependency, without manipulation, without unrealistic expectations. Was it different? Very. Was it better? For me, yes, because it was honest, it was real, it was sustainable. There was a specific day that marked an important turning point. I was on the porch, having coffee and watching the sunrise, when I realized I was smiling. Not for any specific reason, just smiling. Happy to be alive, happy to be there, happy to be who I was at that moment. And I realized I was no longer waiting for anything from anyone to be happy. I wasn't waiting for my children to validate me. I wasn't waiting for someone to recognize my worth. I already knew my worth, and I was living according to it. That was true freedom. Happiness without permission. Happiness that doesn't depend on external circumstances, but on internal choices. I looked in the mirror one ordinary morning and saw a different woman. I still had wrinkles, still had white hair, still had all the marks that age brings. But there was something more. There was light in my eyes. There was a genuine smile. There was an upright posture of someone who no longer carries the weight of the world on her shoulders. I was whole, complete. I didn't need anything more, anyone else to feel fulfilled. Were my children part of my life? Yes. But they were no longer the center of it. The center was me. And that shift in axis, that silent revolution, had been the best thing that could have happened to me. This emotional story had broken me into 1,000 pieces, but it had also given me the chance to rebuild myself. And by rebuilding myself, I had chosen a better version of myself, a version that finally knew how to live, to really live, to live for myself. In the end, this story isn't just about ungrateful children or about an elderly mother who was discarded. It's about something much bigger. It's about learning that you can't live for those who don't value you. It's about understanding that true love comes with respect, and when respect ends, what's left isn't love. It's just habit, obligation, or worse, exploitation. I spent decades building my children's lives, believing that maternal sacrifice was synonymous with unconditional love. But I discovered, in the most painful way possible, that love without limits becomes disrespect, and disrespect destroys everything. Today, I look back and see a woman who was reborn from her own ashes, who chose her own dignity above others' approval, who learned that happiness doesn't need permission. And you, what would you do if you were in my place? If your own children sent you that cruel message, publicly excluded you, discarded you after years of dedication? Would you have the courage to cut everything off, to start from scratch, to choose yourself, even knowing you'd be judged for it? Think about it, because one day you might be in that position, and you'll need to decide, keep accepting crumbs of affection or demand the banquet of respect you deserve. Have you been through something similar? Do you know someone living this situation? Leave your story in the comments. Sometimes, sharing our pains helps us heal and helps other people realize they're not alone in this struggle. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss other emotional stories that bring life lessons and make us reflect on our own choices and relationships. Because real stories like this remind us that life isn't a fairy tale, it's a journey of learning. And sometimes the most valuable lessons come from the most painful experiences. Until the next story.